greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. Oh, and by the way, he made the stars also. So let's take a look a little bit at this magnificent thing that God has made. Just a few statistics here. If you want the diameter of the sun, 865,000 miles in diameter. That's 109 times the size of the Earth, or the diameter of the Earth. So it's huge. We think the Earth is large. The sun is 109 times larger. And if you wanted to take a trip over there, you might get burnt up on the way, but 93 million miles. We can't even conceive of these numbers. I'm going to give you a lot of numbers here just to blow your mind. And it takes light, and light travels 186,000 miles per hour, or per second rather, yeah, per second. It takes light 8 minutes and 20 seconds to get from the sun to the Earth. So that's quite a distance. It orbits the galaxy, the Milky Way that we are in, every 240 million years. So it hasn't even made one rotation yet since day 4. Contrary to the evolutionary idea. The moon? Well, the sun is 400 times the diameter of the moon. And interestingly, coincidentally, probably not, the sun is 400 times further from the Earth than the moon. And coincidentally, the moon is 1/4 the size of the Earth, or 2,160 miles in diameter, about the distance from here to Boston or New York. And is all this a coincidence, or do you see something else? When the sun and the moon align, what do we get? We get an eclipse, which is an interesting phenomenon. And if you look at it, the disk of the moon is almost exactly the size. So they're positioned, and the sizes don't seem to be coincidental. It seems that there is design. Can anyone say design? And there's a lot of these. In fact, if you look at the numbers, there's a lot of things astronomically that are precise, predictable, and show evidence of design. And I think Jim did a good job of bringing a lot of that out. Now, our neighborhood, the solar system, just to give you kind of a feel for the relative size, here's the sun. Remember, it's 109 times the diameter of the Earth right there. Mercury, pretty small. Venus, smaller than the Earth. Mars, in the range of Mercury. Jupiter, very large, etc. Just to give you a feel for what we're dealing with. And the distances are interesting as well. Well, at the end of verse 16, notice what it says. Now, New American Standard inserts, he made almost, oh, by the way, kind of as a side light, because it's just easy for him, no big deal. I mean, the making of the sun, no big deal. Making of the stars, not any more problem. Incidentally, only since you were wondering, and you were going to ask the question, what about the stars? Well, as an afterthought, almost an addendum, almost added on, stars also. And that's the literal translation of the Hebrew. It doesn't have he made the stars. It's just, and the stars. In other words, added on, incidentally, since you were wondering about it, almost as an afterthought. Because the stars amongst the ancients were worshipped. They were the basis of the astrological charts. It was the basis of a lot of temples and gods in the ancient world. By the way, I made them as well. I'm the creator of the stars. This one happens, these three galaxies, 400 million light years away. 1 Corinthians 15:41 says there is one glory of the sun. And what I think Paul is saying, he's distinguishing, there's different characteristics, there's different varieties between the sun and another glory of the moon. There's distinctions there, there are differences. Now, we obviously know that the moon is not a source of light, it is just a reflector of light. And another glory of the stars, so there's an abundance of variety amongst stars. For star differs from star in glory. Now, if you were living in Moses' time, you probably couldn't distinguish very much, except maybe by brightness, the stars. We know today that there are vast differences and all kinds of differences. Now, the Israelites wouldn't have known that necessarily, but today with our technology we're able to see that the Bible was accurately presented in Mosaic and even before Moses' time. So there are differences, there are distinctions, there are a variety of stars. The sun is different from the moon is different from the stars, and even our own sun is different. And just a list here, don't ask me to distinguish them, ask Jim. There are red giants, supergiants, white and yellow dwarfs. By the way, the sun is considered a yellow dwarf. There are variable stars, pulsars, binaries, planetary nebulae, neutron stars. And also, by the way, there's no separate word in the Hebrew or in the Greek language for planets. So when you look out in the sky, we have a hard time distinguishing between Mars or Jupiter or Venus from the rest of the stars. So from the visual, from the perspective of the sight, there's no separate word, so perhaps, and there seems to be some indication in some passages are probably referring to perhaps planets, and some of the passages like in the book of Revelation, there's no distinction made between comets and asteroids or meteorites. So those would be included in the word star. So when God made the stars, He also made the planets, He also made asteroids, He also made meteorites, etc. Okay? Quite a lot of variety. And even there's even variety amongst the galaxies. Here's one that's 3 million light years away, relatively close to us in comparison to some of the others. Here's another one, the Silver Dollar Galaxy. 10 million. We're getting a little bit further out. But notice the difference, quite variety in even galaxies. Galaxies are just clusters of stars. A small galaxy will have around 1 billion stars. A large galaxy will have over 1 trillion and everything in between. Ours is kind of a medium-sized, 100 billion? Is that about the number? 100 billion stars, the Milky Way. Here's one 31 million light years away, a spiral with a companion galaxy, which is interesting. Totally different kind of galaxy called a lenticular galaxy or disk galaxy, about 44 million light years away. 50 million light years away, a distorted galaxy. Notice the variety and differences. What are the estimates for about that we know of? Galaxies, over 1 billion, billions of them, right? Billions of galaxies out there. And each galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars within it. So we're talking about amazing stuff. We can't even comprehend them. 85 million light years away, another spiral galaxy. Well, let's talk a little about this conflict that we have, and let me lay some groundwork for you. with the theories of today, the science theories of today, and evolution, primarily evolutionary thinking. Let me lay some groundwork, and then let me give you some reasons why we should believe in what the Bible tells us rather than what the evolutionary scientist tries to tell us. First of all, science, the essence of science deals with what? What you can observe what? Observations in the present. That's the heart of science. You make observations in the present. What you can do here and now. Now, when we're dealing with origins, what are we dealing with? Something that happened in the present? No, we're dealing with things that took place in the past. So already we're talking about history, or we're talking about things that took place in the past. Now, it's good to remember this, because when you're trying to look back into the past and project back, you have to keep some of these things in mind. We're dealing more with a historical study than we are a purely scientific study. Now, you can apply principles of science, but you have to keep in mind what you're doing here. History deals with the traces of the past, and that's all that we can deal with. Now, we can evaluate, to some extent, scientifically, those traces. Does that make sense? So this whole area of origins, this whole area of evolutionary theory and thought deals with what happened in the past, trying to interpret and trying to understand what took place in the past. Just to bring it home, here's a couple of evolutionists. This is pretty typical. Ehrlich and Birch. Our theory of evolution has become one which cannot be refuted by any possible observations, because evolution took place. So you can't make observations and refute it. It is thus outside empirical science. You can't test it. But not necessarily false. In other words, we believe it. It's not necessarily false. No one can think of ways in which to test it. Evolutionary ideas have become part of an evolutionary what? What is that? What is a dogma? It's a belief. We accept it by faith, is what he's saying. We accept it as a dogma, accepted by most of us as part of our training. And those of you that have science background, this is what you've been taught. And once you trusted in Christ, now you renew your mind to figure out what is really going on out there. So it's admitted by evolutionists. What they believe is really a faith position. Now, what is history? History takes pieces of data, those traces. These are traces left by an event. Like if you're dealing with the geological record, those are traces of past events, these layers and fossils within those layers. Those are the traces that are left from past events. And in those layers, you don't have anything that has a date on it to tag it. This was buried on such a date. So you're just looking at the traces of an event. So a historical fact, this is a little bit more of the background here, a historical fact equals these pieces of data plus what? Very important. Interpretation.